What is up, everybody? It's Brandon coming at you live from Smith's Grove, and today we're going to be continuing the Friday the 13th series. Now, Halloween may be over for the rest of the world, but here at Smith's Grove, it never ends. It's all year long, and today we're going to be taking a look at Friday the 13th, Part 2, released in 1981 and directed by Steve Miner.
I can't believe this. I can't tell you anything. Every time I tell you something, everybody else knows about it. No, I'm mad.
So after the success of Friday the 13th in 1980, Paramount began the plans for making a sequel to the slasher, and originally it was set to be the start of an anthology series, where each movie would be based on the superstitious holiday itself, but never really directly tied to one another. After the reception of Jason in the last jump scare of the original, it was decided that the new film would focus on everyone's soon-to-be favorite disfigured serial killer instead. At the time, the crew, including Sean Cunningham, was said to have had mixed feelings on the idea, since writer Victor Miller wrote Jason as definitively dead in the original. For the same reason, special effects artist Tom Savini decided to drop out of the project to take a gig working on 1981's The Burning, one of the many Friday the 13th ripoffs. Standing in temporarily for Savini was the late great Stan Winston, who went on to work on some of the most legendary projects ever, including John Carpenter's The Thing, The Terminator, and Jurassic Park. Unfortunately, Winston also had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts before getting a replacement in Karl Fullerton. Fullerton is credited for the new design for adult Jason in this movie that would later be abandoned in Part 3. But don't feel too bad though. Every single movie has a different looking Jason going forward. The cast for Part 2 is a considerable step up, in my opinion, from Part 1's short list of shallow characters. While you do have a wide variety of background counselors for a short time in this movie to provide more of a busier feeling, the ones that stand out here are a variety of cliche characters made for the forefront of the film. And in fact, this is probably one of the most quintessential and even grounded lineups in one of these types of movies. You've got John Fury as Paul Holt, the cocky leader of Counselor School and a strong male type that doesn't take the legend of Jason too seriously. There's also underage camp trainee Sandra and her 1940s hat-wearing boy toy Jeff, played by Marta Kober and Bill Randolph respectively. You can't have a movie without some eye candy and a horny guy lusting after her, so you have Terry, played by Kristen Baker, and Scott, played by actor Russell Todd. Now, if you don't think that that's inclusive enough for you, we also have the wheelchair-bound character of Mark, played by actor Tom McBride, who's actually gay in real life, and Vicky, played by actress Lauren Marie Taylor, who's about as thirsty as it comes for the cripple. Oh, and there's Big Bird, played by Stu Charno, but he won't mind if you just call him Ted. Returning from the original are Adrian King, Walt Gorney, and Betsy Palmer, all reprising their previous roles, but only very briefly. For Part 2's role of the final girl, Jenny, actress Amy Steele won the part through an audition, although she has said that she didn't really take the part very seriously at first. She absolutely loves and appreciates the role now, but at the time she had no idea what it all really meant for her. I know this much, we all love us some Amy Steele. For the role of Jason, the credit goes to two men in Friday the 13th Part 2. Actor Warrington Gillette gets the nod for unmasked Jason at the end of the film, while Steve Daskowitz, also known as Steve Dash, is credited for the masked Jason work. With a story and cast in hand, director Steve Miner and most of the original movie's crew began principal photography in the areas of New Preston and Kent, Connecticut in October of 1980, with an ending just over a month later in November. By the way, if Steve Miner sounds familiar, it's because you may remember me previously mentioning him on this channel as the director of Halloween H2O. And of course, this marks him as the one and only director to direct more than one of horror's big three. He also served as the producer to the first Friday film and would go on to direct the sequel to this one as well. Filming of Friday the 13th Part 2 definitely didn't go without issues. Most of the cast and crew seemed to have a good time, but it was said to have been rough for Amy Steele, who had to operate in a constant state of fear. Injuries were also prone to happen on set, with several of the actresses reporting injuries, including Adrian King, who was injured after the ice pick prop failed to retract properly. One of the more notable instances was when Steve Dash was rushed to the emergency room after Amy Steele accidentally hit him with the machete in his hand. They did get a really funny story out of the deal though, as Dash went to the hospital emergency room with the machete prosthetic still in his shoulder, thus freaking everyone in the hospital out. Issues for the movie also arose during post-production of the film, one being that Paramount, discovering actress Marta Kober was only 16 at the time and had already filmed a full frontal nude scene. Now, footage of the nudity was properly deleted, as well as a total of 48 seconds of additional footage, mainly from kills, that needed to be cut in order to obtain the R rating instead of that dreaded X rating. Unfortunately, this will be a common theme going forward in these films as well. Friday the 13th Part 2 was released theatrically on May 1st, 1981, just under a year after the first one and playing on over 1,300 screens. On a budget of $1.25 million, it would gross a total of $21.7 million in box office revenue and finish 35th overall in 1981. But to be fair, it had some pretty strong competition in that year. Critical response for the film wasn't exactly favorable, but it has become a fan favorite over the years. And no doubt due to Amy Steele's performance of the character of Jenny, it's also the first movie to really lay out the groundwork, I think, for the rest of the series, and of course, introduce Jason as the main antagonist. So how much damage does this hillbilly brute cause in his first outing? Let's find out as we take a look at yet another horrifying event at Camp Crystal Lake in Friday the 13th, Part 2. The movie begins with a kid singing Itsy Bitsy Spider outside in some neighborhood while also splashing in puddles. Shitty kid. It's late, man. Get the hell inside.
Jesse,
again.
you get in this house right now.
Yeah, Jesse. We then get a faceless figure in boots walking across the road towards a house that we find out is keeping our OG final girl, Alice. Inside, she's twitching around in her bed, dreaming about the events of the first film's climax, and it really plays out a long time here, right down to the scare of Jason coming out of the water and the scene in the hospital. By the way, this is only 2 months after the events of that film, so Alice is still very much recovering. Alice wakes up and washes her sweaty face in the bathroom before getting a phone call from her mother. Fun fact about Adrienne King's role in this movie, she ad-libbed her lines on the phone here because they didn't even have any dialogue for her in the script. She didn't even know she was getting killed until she showed up on set. Adrienne was dealing with a stalker at this time, which put her in a really bad situation and even eventually led to a moment where she was held at gunpoint by the dude and had to talk him down. That's the stuff of nightmares right there. Now, I've heard 2 different stories about Adrienne's involvement in this film. One was that she wanted a smaller role because of the stalker issue at the time, and 2 was that her agent actually asked for a higher salary on her behalf, but the studio couldn't afford it. Now, the latter was told in the Crystal Lake Memories documentary, so I guess we can go with that one? Alice changes out of all that green shit she's got on and hops in the shower. The shortest f***ing shower in history, I might add. After receiving another phone call with no answer, she putts around her house for a few, which again takes a really long time as they try to build suspense. It finally ends in the kitchen when Alice grabs an ice pick and gets startled by her cat jumping through the window. By the way, I've never heard a cat make that sound when they're jumping through anything, let alone a window. I guess for a cliche jump scare it's okay, but it's ridiculous in reality. After her and the audience calms their tits for a moment, she opens up the fridge to find what I assume is Pamela Voorhees' head on the top shelf. Ah, damn it. Well, we actually lost our final girl, guys, and to an ice pick no less. Poor cat there just staring, knowing he's gonna have to make his own way now. Well, we make it to the explosive title card, which I really like in this one, as well as Harry Manfredini's kick-ass score, obviously. Unfortunately, the opening credits are still bland as shit. After the credits, we fast forward a whole 5 years to the introduction of Jeff and Sandra rolling into town. They find a payphone to call a guy named Ted, and as they do, Crazy Ralph shows up and interrupts them, spouting his doom and gloom.
You're all doomed.
They also notice Jeff's truck getting towed at this time, and they end up chasing after him on foot. They eventually come across the character of Ted around the corner, who's this lady killer right here, and he's laughing his ass off. Turns out Ted put gas station owner Max up to this little prank, which garners this reaction from Jeff. Wow, dude, just snap him with a towel already. What the f*** was that? On their way to camp, they stop to move a fallen tree branch from the road, and while they're doing that, Sandra spots an old Camp Crystal Lake sign on the ground and shows Ted. Ted refers to that camp as Camp Blood and then says it's on the same lake that they're gonna be. This, of course, piques the interest of Sandra and Jeff, which Ted blows off, but remember this because it's gonna get the young couple in trouble soon. Over at the new campsite on Crystal Lake, which is just adjacent to the original Camp Crystal Lake, we get to briefly meet all the new fresh meat. You got the leader Paul, the extras, the jock cripple and his thirsty wannabe helper, the ass, Mickey Mouse, and this boner guy who likes to wink. Paul starts orientation with the crew as new final girl Jenny and her sickly beetle come traipsing in late, much to the disapproval of Paul. You just can't stay mad at her though, Paul. She's just too likable. Oh, and she also passed Ralph on her way in. That dude is getting some serious miles on that bike of his, and that was quick too, damn. After a little one-on-one talk with our cocky leader, Jenny tries to move her car but has trouble getting it started. I only bring this scene up because we get a little character development here for Jenny and some foreshadowing for later on.
Use a little of that child psychology you're majoring in.
By the way, guys, we are now 24 minutes into this movie with just under an hour left. Things are gonna need to get rolling. That night, we get one of my favorite scenes in this franchise with one of my favorite crews around a campfire as Paul gives it to us straight about Jason.
I
I'm gonna give it to you straight about Jason.
So, trying to make sense of the timeline here might be a little wonky, but for the sake of this movie, you just have to kind of accept that the story of Jason has already become somewhat of a legend by this point. Some people believe he might be out there still because his body was never found, but Paul himself believes that this was just an urban legend and that Mrs. Voorhees was the killer and is now dead too. He definitely uses this opportunity to scare the shit out of everyone though. I do really like this about Paul. As a leader, he addressed the rumors and the elephant in the room with his workers so they can get it out of their system and focus on the future. Of course, he turns out to be wrong, but still. As everyone settles down for the night with some party games and whatnot, we find out that Jenny's not just good at child psychology, but she's also good at taking Paul's ass to school in a game of chess. She turns in for the night, but not before Paul gets a little action, but he's not the only one. Crazy Ralph is creeping in on that action too. Now, some prefer maybe to hide in a closet. I'll tell you something, Ralph, the best thing about closets is you have a wall behind you so no one can do this. It's hard seeing behind those trees, huh? I'm not sure what Jason was standing on here, though, to make him seem so much taller than Ralph. Arm placements just seem off to me. The next morning, Jenny leads the crew in a morning run, while Jeff gets shit from the wheelchair guy. And he's running in his hat. Wait, what the f***? Ted, what is that? One thing I also appreciate in this movie is the visual humor used between transitions. Like this scene with Terry's dog Muffin, for instance. She runs into what we can assume is Jason, only for it to cut straight to a shot of hot dogs on the grill in the next scene. As everyone is having some lunch, Jenny is showing us that she can also use a chainsaw too. That girl is well-rounded, I'll tell you that. Speaking of well-rounded, Terry is out looking for poor Muffin when she gets called to lunch. Don't worry, Terry. Sandra and Jeff will find what I presume is her as they sneak off to Camp Blood. And take it easy, fellas. Sandra may look like eye candy here, but she's only 16, and you know what that means.
Right to jail.
They end up getting caught by local lawman Deputy Winslow, played by Jack Marks. Fun fact, in the original script, this deputy didn't even have a name. It wasn't until the novelization came out 7 years later in 1988 that they gave him this name. He takes them back to Paul, who fails to punish the Wanderers for their misdeed right in front of him, but don't worry, Deputy Winslow, they'll get what's coming to them. As Deputy Winslow leaves the camp, he spots a masked figure running across the road, and of course, he thinks it's one of those meddling kids again, so he runs after them, very poorly. He eventually stumbles onto the shack in the woods that Jason's been living in for what I'm assuming is the last 20 years and finds a room that he reacts really poorly to when he opens the door. And we'll get to see that room later. With Winslow distracted by whatever it is in that room, Jason creeps up behind him and kills him with the claw side of a hammer. Look at those choppers, man, damn. By the way, let me know in the comments what you guys prefer as a hammer kill. This one, or the one in Halloween 2 on Mr. Garrett. 81 was a good year for hammers. That night, Paul, Ted, and Jenny take the crew into town for a little bar action. Conveniently, all of our main supporting cast stay behind so they can play with Jason. Sandra and Jeff decide to get frisky early while Vicky proposes a game to Mark to play for position. And someone get this woman a cold shower. Terry, on the other hand, decides she's going to take a walk and maybe even a little dip in the lake.
Nobody's around? It's naughty time. Please don't stop. You've been on the road. Oh, those are real.
While she's getting nippy, Scott decides to take her clothes as a joke because that's what you do to someone you want to bone, I guess. You piss them off and you play a terrible trick on them.
60% of the time, it works every time.
Much to Terry's delight, the joke is turned on him almost immediately when he steps into a rope trap and gets hung upside down from a tree. He manages to talk Terry into getting something to cut him down, but Jason sneaks in and opts for cutting his throat instead, with the dull side of the machete for some reason. Terry comes back to find him dead and then is killed off screen too. R.I.P. Terry. At the local watering hole, Jenny starts to entertain the idea of Jason actually existing, which Ted and Paul dismiss.
Oh, bullshit, Jenny.
What would it be like today? Some kind of out-of-control psychopath? Frightened retard?
Whoa, you're not supposed to say that anymore, I don't think, Jenny. What do you think, Paul?
I think you're drunk.
Back at camp, Sandra and Jeff take it upstairs while Mark and Vicky decide how much they want to spend the night together. Vicky goes to change her shirt and panties, even giving herself a little razzle-dazzle. While she takes her sweet time, Mark is left downstairs wondering where the hell she went off to. He thinks he hears her on the porch and goes to check it out, but only finds a machete in his face. Holy shit, that was crazy. Look at him falling backwards down those steps. Now I have to say that while I understand why they did the freeze frame here, I can't say that I'm a big fan of it. I mean, the kill itself was cool and pretty wild and even kind of funny. But yeah, not my favorite thing. Also, we once again get a kill with the dull side of a machete, and how the hell did Mark not see Jason out there? Given the placement, it's almost impossible for him not to see or hear him. Jason makes his way upstairs now with Ted's spear and finds Jeff and Sandra doing the dirty. We avoid any underage nudity here, thankfully, and Jason gets a 2-for-1 combo meal, or a twofer if you prefer. Man, I wish the MPAA didn't destroy this movie's kills. And you're gonna hear me say that a lot in this franchise, but still. when you actually watch them, they're not that bad. They're actually pretty tame when you put them up against some of the newer movies that we've watched, even some of the movies back then. About this time, Vicky comes strolling back in from God knows where, and somehow isn't even soaked from the rainstorm that's been happening for a little while now. She calls out for Mark as she heads upstairs because that's exactly where a guy in a wheelchair would be, upstairs. As Vicky approaches the bed upstairs, Jason, complete with pillow cover on his head, springs out of the sheets for his very first close-up shot in the franchise, as an adult anyway. The weird thing is, even though we finally get to see him, he still kills Vicky in a POV shot. Paul and Ginny, meanwhile, have left Ted and all the other extra crew members at the bar where the local townsfolk actually stood in for the extras in these scenes. And if you're disappointed about Ted not dying in this movie, well, I'm right there with you. They actually found someone that may have been just a little bit too goofy to even kill in this movie. They returned back to camp to find the lights on and some bloody sheets upstairs. Damn it, guys, Paul warned you about the bears earlier in this movie.
And keep clean during your menstrual cycle.
I love Ginny all the time, but from here on out, she's just great. Paul kind of assumes when they get back that it might just be a joke, but Ginny is just absolutely sure that they wouldn't play a trick on them like that. They eventually make their way into the office, and this is another one of my favorite scenes. Paul is in there checking things out as Ginny walks in, and she knows something doesn't feel right.
Paul, there's someone in this fucking room!
And someone is right. Jason lunges out of a dark corner at Paul with a spear but misses and a fight ensues. Paul quickly loses in the struggle and Jason turns his attention on Ginny, which starts her final girl circuit. There's a lot of cat and mouse here, with Ginny even taking some bumps along the way, and we really get some tense scenes in this pursuit. At one point she even pisses herself while she's hiding under a bed, leading Jason to find her. Of course, he misses because he's extra clumsy in this movie. He just isn't that scary zombified brute yet, so he takes his own share of licks here from Ginny. Even the chainsaw she was using earlier gets some more screen time. I love how she backs him down here and he's almost frightened himself. She makes it out of there and eventually makes her way through the woods and comes across Jason's little shack with a cool shot of him running up in the background. It's here we finally get to see what's inside door number 1. And it's Pamela Voorhees, y'all. I mean, it's her head and her sweater in this weird shrine, but... oh, and look, there's Terry too. I'm not sure how she died, but she did. There's not even any blood. Ginny decides to finally pull that child psychology we've been waiting for out of her ass when she puts on Mama Voorhees' sweater and pretends to be her. She barks some commands at Jason and we get a good visual of the Betsy Palmer cameo merged with Ginny, and the trick seems to work on this big goof. Unfortunately, it's not for long when he notices Pam's head behind Ginny during her machete swing. He just manages to get her blocked with the pickaxe and cuts her leg with it. And of course, just in the nick of time for Paul to come back into the picture. He manages to wrestle with Jason again long enough for Ginny to get a big swing on him, planting that machete right into his left shoulder. Ouch. They then unmask the seemingly dead killer, but we don't get to see that just yet. The looks on their faces are supposed to suffice for now. Paul carries Ginny back to the cabin to patch her up when they hear a noise. Ready this time, Paul opens up the door to... aw, Muffin. Hey, Muffin. See, guys, it's nothing. It's just holy f***. We flash to White and the next morning where Ginny is rolled out into the ambulance calling Paul's name. Paul, of course, is nowhere to be found. We fade to a long zoom shot of Pamela Voorhees' head and then we cut to credits. And that was Friday the 13th Part 2, released in 1981 and directed by Steve Miner. Thank God those eyes didn't open at the end, huh? Apparently opening her eyes was in the original script and they even had themselves a little back and forth on whether or not to do it. Thank God they didn't. I'm glad they ended it this way. That would have been lame as hell. So yeah, I absolutely love this one, guys. It's not perfect by any means, and the timelines are a little bit wonky, for sure. And it doesn't really get much better going forward. Still, this is probably in my top 5. Of course, the real ranking will come after I finish this series. For the pros in this movie are aplenty. The dialogue itself isn't perfect, but it's far better than the first one, and I love most of the characters in this one as well. But let's be real, we watch these movies for the tropes, the kills, and the TNA. That said, this movie in particular is still fairly grounded, and so are the characters. Even though some of them had those cliche character types, they weren't near as bad as what we would get later on. Again, Ginny is one of the best, if not the best, final girl in the entire franchise. And she did a really, really good job here at showing fear at the right moments, and even bravery in the right moments when she was fighting back against Jason. As far as the kills go, I like them for the most part. Aside from all the negatives that I mentioned earlier, like the dull side of the machete, the freeze frame, Mark's kill, still probably my favorite of the movie. The twofer was good, but would have been a lot better with that added length. Of course, you can't go without saying that Manfredini's score is once again incredible. It's top notch all the way through the franchise, so that's just going to be a given. I'll still mention it But yeah, awesome. As far as the setting or the location goes, it may not be quite as popular or as iconic as the ones in the next film. Of course, that's always up for debate, but this is still one of my favorites too. For my cons, I don't have many in this one. I don't really think that Jason traveling beyond Crystal Lake to go get Alice is something that makes much sense to me. I never really liked that. I think it's a little bit weird. I get the revenge plot, but still, I didn't really like it that much. To be honest, they should have just skipped the whole thing entirely and let her live and just ride off into the sunset and move on to the next thing. And they could have used that time to maybe kill Ted or somebody else in this movie and added another kill. You know, the opening, I understand that you got to show some stuff from the first one to kind of give us a little bit of a replay, but the pacing was just absolute shit. Even after like what, a 5-minute opening and replay, we still drag on and on until we finally get to that Alice kill. Now, of course, the saving grace was the movie really got rolling that last hour or so, but then again, it had to. Not really a con, but I'm on the fence about Jason in this one. I really like the mask. I think it looks really good. I like the pillowcase. Obviously, it's not my favorite, but I still really enjoy it. They were going for that town that dreaded sundown kind of thing, I think. I still prefer his looks later on. But the biggest bugaboo I have is how goofy and awkward and clumsy he was. You know, the chainsaw scene aside, that was pretty decent, but him falling on the chair, breaking it, stumbling, missing Paul, he just seemed, you know, he fell over, I think, jumping out of the woods at her. He lunged at her and fell. Which the stuntman broke his ribs at that time, I think, during that scene because he landed on the pickaxe. So, yeah, again, another one of those injuries. But anyway, I think it was just too clumsy at times, so I thought it was a little bit too much. I think he was a little bit too human. I think somewhere in between, you know, is where I prefer Jason. But still, all in all, really good entry in this series, really solid movie. And of course, you know, it set the tone for the rest of the series to come in that formula. I'm going to give Friday the 13th Part 2 a 4 out of 5. I mean, it basically is a remake of the first one with that revenge plot. You just switch Pamela for Jason. Yeah, still, but they get even more right, I think, in this one, and it's just that much better. And again, you got Jenny, who I think is probably my favorite final girl. Her and those moments with Jason and everything at the end just, I think, set this bar for the franchise to a really high level that, you know, it's hard to match. But can that bar be reached or even surpassed in the next one? There's the question that we're going to have to answer next time out on Smith's Grove when we take a look at Friday the 13th, Part 3. That's right, next time out we get to see if Jason finally figures out which side of the machete blade to use as he trades in that pillowcase for a new hockey mask. Only took 3 movies to don that iconic look. Until then, guys, thank you so much for all your support. Thank you so much for watching, and stay sane.